So I want to get a little bit of a layer deeper. I know we've covered some of this as far as the role of a pen test. If you look at it in the entire kind of security mix, and I'll pause right there, and I'll just make another comment to carry on what Kirk said. You know, this is the advertisement. We appreciate Juniper Networks for actually sponsoring this event. It's very helpful in getting the voice out into the community, and they made this possible. So I really appreciate them participating in it. But so Kyle, when you look at the overall security mix, how does a pen test fit into that?
Yeah, I think kind of piggybacking what Brian just said, I really think the primary purpose and value you're going to get out of a penetration test is validating the security and network tools, as well as people that an organization has implemented basically to defend itself. You could have best of breed stuff like Kirk was talking about, and some new IPS and IDS stuff like Brian was talking about implemented in your network. But even though you have those tools and you have people that are probably supposed to follow some procedures that revolve around incident response or utilizing those tools, how do you really know that any of those things are operating like you need them to be when a real attack is occurring? So a penetration test can help you validate that you either do or do not have the right tuning in place or the right procedures in place. Additionally, kind of also penetration test gets thrown into the security mix when it comes to identifying attack paths. One thing we'll do during penetration tests, based on the goals of the test, of course, is kind of go through different paths that we see on the network. And when I say paths, I mean different ways that we're going to first drop into the network and then pivot throughout the network, possibly gaining privilege, accessing sensitive data, eventually moving to some point where we have a large amount of that access. So kind of going from nothing to something to everything is kind of an attack path. And what a penetration test can do is highlight the various attack paths that exist in a network and present those to the defenders of the organization to interpret as they will. Sometimes we might go through an entire attack path and talk with the defenders afterwards, and they'll be like, yep, we saw everything you were doing from point A to point B all the way to point Z, and we were happy with how our tools were operating. We were happy with the logs and alerts we were generating, and it's awesome to see that what you were doing was actually alerting us, because that validates that the alerts and things that they have in place are working. Other times, we'll go through maybe a different attack path to somewhere else in the network and talk with them afterwards, and they'll be like, yeah, we have no, they'd be flabbergasted because they would just say, we have no idea you were doing any of that. We've clearly got some changes to make. And the penetration test can help highlight those types of things. Really ultimately at the end of a penetration test, you're going to get a report, an in-depth report of what happened, and a conversation with the penetration testers that did the work. And that document and that conversation a lot of times can be used to better align an organization's business leaders and security leaders to make sure they're all on the same page as far as how are we doing with our security posture now, and what do we really need to do to move forward on that to the next step. And that actual physical document that you've got in the conversation can really help to blend those two worlds together, I think, so everyone's on the same page.
Mm-hmm. So Dylan, what type of insights, I would love to get your perspective on this, what type of insights should we expect a pen test to provide us?
Yeah, so I mean, generally speaking, and I don't want to regurgitate, a little too much of what we've already talked about, but you're going to come away with a better understanding in your security gaps, right? Be it patch management, but more common nowadays, I think customers walk away with a better understanding of what controls need to be tuned a little better, whether that's, EDR, and also understanding the limitations of the controls that they have in place, right? Because there are limitations and that may not be clear, so sometimes, a customer might be curious as to, why didn't a certain product block, a certain activity or get alerted on something. And, going down that path, as Kyle had mentioned, essentially establishing command and control. Customers are very interested in that. So when you finally kind of get that foothold into a network, um, for example, a common C2 channel might use HTTP, and they may have security controls, such as proxies that, will only allow outbound traffic for various categorized domains, and they might be doing SSL inspection, but attackers are already thinking about that, and they're buying domains that are already categorized that hopefully get out. And they're doing, buying domains that hopefully, aren't going through SSL inspection, things like finance and healthcare domains. But there's also other ways to get outside the network, right? So we're still on that foothold because customers usually have a lot of questions about that. And HTTP isn't the only protocol, right? So I mean, there's DNS. There's also ICMP, right? So if you're allowing ICMP traffic outbound, an ICMP is a viable C2 channel. More than often, if you want to stay under the radar, you usually stick with DNS though.
Is this stuff that, like, I feel like automated testing should be finding a lot of this, right? But the sense I'm kind of getting is maybe it's more intricate than that. So I'm kind of curious to know, because you mentioned earlier, I think it was, I actually think all of you have mentioned it at some point, automated tool sets are only so effective, right? Like, why is that? Like, what's the difference between Cam going out and buying some tools, maybe even the same tools that you're using, and running those tests versus you guys doing it?
Yeah, and there is always that, right? These tools are readily available out there. Just like I could probably go and buy all the surgeon's tools and attempt an open heart surgery. Cam, I think you mentioned to me the other day, anybody can buy a race car, right? But you may not be a great driver once you hop into that. So there is definitely a place for tools. There is a place for automation. I think everybody in IT and security these days is familiar with a vulnerability scanner, whether it's Nessus or Qualys or Rapid7. These scanners are very, very common. If you don't already own a scanner, you should. Our pen tests are not a replacement for doing good regular monitoring and scanning and things like that you can do with automation. We get asked a lot when we sit down and talk with new clients or just about anybody out there, actually, like, what tools do you use? What are you guys using? And I laugh a little bit at that question, but I think it's also an awesome introduction to a discussion that needs to be had. And that's the fact that these tools are just that. In the hands of a good experienced pen tester, they make you very efficient and very good at what you do. But the reality is that, just running automation against your systems to scan and look for vulnerabilities will find a lot, but it's not going to find the things that the pen tester is looking for. And I don't want to say the things that really matter, because it all matters. Any exploitable vulnerability matters. But if you can buy a $2,000 copy of Nessus and find out all that really, really low-hanging fruit, then you should be doing that. In fact, you must be doing that. And the pen test is going to be everything that comes after that.
So there's a buildup here, because this conversation, there's been a lot, pen testers are ethical, and we're super good, and we're smarter than the script kiddies and all this kind of stuff. And that's all probably very true, right? But then there's also we went from back in the day just exploiting patch exploits and all that kind of stuff to like social engineering. And I'm not going to lie, like, if I'm an organization, like, how do I know what I want, right? And more importantly, like, how do I make sure that I'm asking the right things and the rules of engagement, so to speak, align with my goals? Because I probably don't know.
Yeah, yep. And I think I heard a couple different questions in there, one of which is around this, what should we do, or what's the scope ultimately of this engagement look like? And that varies quite widely. So imagine a very, very large organization, a Fortune 100. they're probably already doing dozens of different types of penetration tests during the year. They might be, doing external in one project, internal in another, their web and mobile applications in yet another, wireless could be another, even like physical, trying to break into facilities and data centers and things like that are scope options there. But a smaller organization, has a much more manageable IT program and targets and things like that for an attacker or a pen tester to go after. So often in a smaller or mid-sized company, we do it all in one engagement, where in a large organization, it might have been many little projects.
Can I interject for just a second here? Break into facilities? What do you mean?
A little of that from time to time. We'll call it a physical pen test or an on-site penetration test. And if you've watched the news recently, you've probably seen a couple handsome penetration testers wearing orange jail uniforms. And, I think that you mentioned that word rules of engagement before. So physical pen testing is a thing. Breaking into buildings and facilities is something that pen testers do from time to time. We're always going to be very careful here at Centercom. We tend not to do these things after hours or when there's building alarms set, or even worse in this scenario out in Iowa, it was sheriffs in a courthouse. So your odds of getting yourself in some real trouble in physical testing become a lot easier than in other types of testing, right?
So just to confirm, you weren't one of those handsome pen testers in an orange uniform?
Not from pen testing, anyway.
All right.